There are a couple of things that we need to keep in mind as scientists, and the first one is of course treating our participants with a lot of care, because they are helping us with our research, and without them we really wouldn't be able to do what we do and be able to explore all of these neat questions that we're thinking about. And the second thing that comes to mind is the way that people will use our results in the future in ways that we didn't anticipate, and maybe in ways that we would not approve of. One example that comes to mind that's been weighing heavily on me for the past few days is the torture report that just came out regarding the torture of the individuals who are suspected of terrorism. And the torturers actually turned to psychologists to figure out how to use the best methods. And Seligman's research, Martin Seligman's research on learned helplessness, was used, and you can read about his study in detail on your own regarding the way that he mistreated dogs. Actually, in his study, he did not torture humans. However, the way that he mistreated the dogs gave people ideas regarding how to torture humans and how to foster in them a learned helplessness so that they would cooperate with interrogators. That was the theory anyway. And so Martin Seligman told the New York Times recently that he is just astounded and very, very upset about how the CIA used his work. And he was deeply regretted that. And so it just kind of was another reminder to me that as a scientist, I have to think ahead a couple of steps and understand how my work may affect people down the line, because, of course, we kind of have a professional oath in our field, and professional guidelines, I should say, that you can read on the APA's website, that we all kind of have to, abide by. And those say that we can't do harm to individuals like this, and the results of our work should not be used for harm, and we might have to take steps to make sure that doesn't happen as much as possible. Of course, we can't foresee everything, but I could think of many other examples of this kind of thing. But anyway, it would take a class probably to talk about all of these different aspects. There are a couple of examples here that I just want to talk with you about that are kind of egregious examples, but there are only a few. So the first one here is the Johns Hopkins lead paint study in the 1990s, and that one was extremely unethical according to many individuals. Lead paint was used, when was it? Back before World War II, pardon me. Houses were painted with this paint that is very harmful. It emits fumes apparently for years after and can cause lots of health problems for people who live in those places. So the purpose of this study was to understand how much of that lead paint had to be cleaned up, because it's a really expensive process for the city or whoever was doing it, so that people could live in those places. So they randomly assigned low-income individuals, and by the way, usually mistreatment of individuals happens to traditionally and historically disadvantaged groups. It just seems to happen that way a lot of times. But these individuals in those lower income neighborhoods were randomly exposed to varying levels of cleaned up homes. So some had a lot of lead exposure, and some had no lead exposure, and some had various levels. So I think there's like 5 levels of lead exposure. And so the researchers did not inform the low-income individuals who were living in those places. They did not inform those residents that they were being exposed to varying levels intentionally. There was just a blanket statement about lead risk. And so there was a big outcry when this came to light, and I'm not sure all the details around that, but there was a big outcry saying that these individuals had no idea that they were being kind of guinea pigs in this kind of study. And so I forgot exactly how all of that came, like how, if anybody was fined or anything. It surely was a stain on Johns Hopkins for doing that. But some individuals have said, kind of a rebuttal to this, they have said, well, this study, actually people would have been exposed fully to the lead if those homes had not been cleaned to some extent. And so this really was helping individuals. So they kind of turned it a little bit to say that they would have been in the fully contaminated places otherwise. So most of the individuals in the study had it actually better than they would have had otherwise. So there are different ways to spin that, but the point is that for research, we are supposed to fully inform our participants. And that's the responsibility of the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, and that is a committee of individuals at institutions that conduct research. SPU has one, of course, and that's why you filled out the little IRB form for our studies that we do. We always do that to get it approved by the IRB. And so that ensures the rights of the research participants and that they know exactly what kinds of things that they'll be going through as they help us with our work. And so it's very important that they're fully informed. And in the lead paint study, they were not fully informed, and so that's probably the most egregious part of that study. As you can see, I've written some notes below the slide, and this is typical for my lectures so that you can read the same notes that I'm reading, basically. And so there are some notes about that lead paint study, and then sometimes I'll also put like websites that you can go to read more about if you want more information about various topics. The second research violation that I found out about a couple of years ago, actually. It was kind of interesting because it was kind of a different spin. And this one was fabricating data. So remember, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First, treating participants correctly. Second, how will people use our results? And there is a third one, and that is reporting the findings accurately. And so Mark Hauser was a cognition scientist. I guess he studied animals at Harvard. And actually a couple of his research assistants, who I think were graduate students, came forward and blew the whistle because they observed a monkey's behavior in a certain way, and they recorded the results the way they saw them. But then Mark changed those results before he submitted the study, I guess, and he reported different data than what his assistants had recorded. And he then published that or something. I don't remember exactly. I think his article may have been retracted, but it wasn't a good situation. So that's another example of something that we want to avoid. And we'll talk more about the systematic I should say the systemic issues around publishing. So again, there are the three aspects: treating participants right, the accuracy of our findings, reporting them honestly, and then also how people use the results of our research. All right, so the IRB is kind of a body that we're accountable to, the individuals who make sure that we are on track for those three things. And so it's important for us to realize that as graduate students and faculty, we represent SPU in all dealings with any outside organizations, at conferences, when we publish our findings in journals. And so that's a responsibility that should be taken, of course, very seriously. And so we want to do our best to make sure that we're always properly representing our institution and doing everything honestly and above board, and just doing the best we can in our work, because we have a really sacred trust, I would say, in terms of what the public sees of research. They are looking to the scientists, to us, to figure out important answers to important problems, etc. And so we are kind of people soon, I mean, it's maybe hard for you all to imagine this right now, but pretty soon people are going to be looking to you as the expert. And kind of the buck stops with you. Right now, you may not be there yet because you're in school and still learning, but very soon you're going to be the one who will, the responsibility will fall on you for your own research and your own practice. And so it's a good time to practice those skills now while we're in school. And so those are the important things to keep in mind. I'm going to talk in the next slide about some difficult circumstances in history that have made things more difficult for us in terms of the way that certain groups of people have been treated in research and what research findings, the implications of those findings have had for them. And so we'll talk about that in the next slide.